Hello, book lovers, and welcome to Dad and Daughter Reads, Episode 3. This week we will be discussing Part 3 of Blood Over Brighthaven by M.L. Wang, chapters 13 through 18. I'm one of your co-hosts, James, or Dad if you prefer, and my co-host is someone who doesn't get that choice, my daughter, Miranda. How have you been this week, Miranda?
Oh, I've been all right considering everything that's going on in the world. But I had fun this week. I had a fun week. How about you?
My week's been fine, considering also, I guess. I'm excited to get to the end of Blood Over Brighthaven later this week. But before we discuss Part 3, let's talk about what else we've been reading. What other books have you read this past week?
So this week I finished The Guest by Emma Cline. I really enjoyed it. It was a take on feminism and classism, how women are expected to act and behave, camouflaging and manipulating their way through a world full of rich men who have always been manipulating and using women, or at least it was like in rich society. And that was my interpretation. It was a little anxiety inducing though, and I know a lot of people hate the ending and find it a little boring, but I was pretty enthralled by it, honestly. I actually read a huge chunk of it on a plane ride, and I couldn't put it down. But next on the list is The Witches of El Paso by Luis Jaramillo. That seems to deal with family history and magical realism. It's his first book. It's his debut as an author. I also hope to start listening to Crying in H Mart here soon by singer Michelle Zauner, which is a memoir about her growing up as a Korean American and losing her mother. What have you been reading?
Cool. I just finished up book 2 of the Farseer trilogy, Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb. The first book, Assassin's Apprentice, was about loneliness, where Fitzchivalry, that's the main character, he's the bastard son of one of the princes of the Kingdom of the Six Duchies. He's not accepted into the court, being an illegitimate son of a prince, but he becomes a king's man, and the king has him trained to be an assassin. And this second book, Royal Assassin, is about loyalty, where he has to balance his loyalty to the crown, the woman that he's in love with, and the wolf he's bonded through the use of forbidden magic. The first 2 books have been really great. Like I said previously, there's not a lot of action in these books, but a lot of political intrigue as well as world building and character building. But speaking of Robin Hobb, the author of those books, I looked at the second trilogy of this series, and I think that's going to be right up your alley, Miranda. You wouldn't even need to read the first trilogy. The second trilogy is called Live Ship Traders. It's a completely different story, but in the same world. And it's about pirates, high seas adventure, and magical sentient ships. So, and I know you like that kind of stuff, right?
I surely do. I love high sea adventure. So yeah, that definitely sounds interesting. I have to check it out.
Yeah, you should check that out. So
Cool.
Since I finished the second book, though, I'm not going to be going straight into the third book, Assassin's Quest, right away. So my book club at work, they're reading Parable of the Sower. I checked it out from the library, and it's due back next week. So I got to get it read before then. I know you've read that too. What did you think about that book? Without giving me too many spoilers, though.
Right. Yeah, well, this is the perfect time to be reading that book because it's a dystopian novel that was written in the 90s, but is set in the year 2024 and talks about like wildfires in LA and a corrupted government. It's really intense and follows a young woman through her diary entries as she starts to form a new religion of her own. But it's a classic. And like I said, this is a perfect time to pick it up.
Right. And that's by Octavia Butler. And I read about the first 40 pages of it last night. It's still kind of in the world building phase and showing, what's going on in the world now. At that time, I think just hit the year 2025 in it, where they ran into like a pack of dogs or something. But yeah, it's very dystopian so far.
Very dystopian. And it gets a little disturbing. So keep afloat.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to continuing with that. It seems really good so far.
Yeah, it's a classic. Everybody should read it.
Fair enough. All right. So that's what we've been reading. Let's get into the social media book buzz. So TikTok was banned and then it wasn't. So what happened was the Supreme Court, they upheld the ban with what's called a per curiam decision. And what that means is the full court was in agreement, but it's an unsigned opinion. So all the little scared little justices, they didn't have to put their name on the opinion, which, the Roberts Court, it already has a historically low public opinion on it. So I guess they didn't want that heat. So about 10 p.m. Eastern on January 18th, which was a Saturday, you could no longer access any videos on TikTok in the US, and you got a message. And here's what that message said. Sorry, TikTok isn't available right now. A law banning TikTok has been enacted in the US. Unfortunately, that means you can't use TikTok for now. We are fortunate that President Trump has indicated that he will work with us on a solution to reinstate TikTok once he takes office. Please stay tuned.
That was so crazy. I remember I was literally on my way to the club when I opened when I opened that up, because I think I saw on Instagram and stuff that TikTok wasn't working anymore, and I opened it up and saw that message myself. Because first of all, they said it was going to go dark on the 19th, and this happened
Right.
like 2 hours before they said. And then when I saw the propaganda of it all, ooh, I was so mad.
So the entire message about Trump is just disgusting. Some people are going so far to say that this thing was all set up for Trump to look like a hero when he brings it back, which he did the next day, and we'll get to that. But really, even the Biden administration said they were not going to enforce it, that TikTok didn't need to shut down, that none of the app stores had to stop carrying it, but they did at the same time. So I don't know. It just looks really bad to me. But the only thing he can do at this point, according to the law anyway, but laws don't matter to him too much, is give a 90-day reprieve for TikTok to find a U.S. buyer. Some people think that a buyer's already been found, and I think that's what you think, right?
That's exactly what I think. I definitely think that there was some sort of backdoor deal, at least currently going on, particularly with Meta, with Mr. Mark, just because when we did go back on TikTok, suddenly Facebook had a TikTok. I think Instagram has had a TikTok, but Facebook didn't before. And now every couple videos, the ads that I'm getting are either Facebook or Instagram, even though I have them blocked, which you told me there is a way to block the ads. But that's not the point. The point is there were not Facebook and Instagram ads on my TikTok
before
until
after it went away and came back
Sunday. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have a feeling that at least partly there's something going on with all those tech bros.
Yeah.
They're all making some sort of deal together.
That might be the case. Personally, I don't think ByteDance will sell all of TikTok because the US market only makes up about 8 to 10% of TikTok's revenue. Now, they could sell the US arm of TikTok, and that's probably what they are going to do. And they probably do have some kind of backdoor deal going on with that right now. I would imagine they do. My question is that going to include the current algorithm as it is? Because in my opinion, that's the best thing about TikTok. I try to get on Instagram and it's just garbage. The algorithm's so weird. I get stuff I don't want to see. With TikTok, I was able to, when you first sign into TikTok, sure, you get stuff you may not necessarily want to see, but the algorithm has to learn what you want. And that's where the not interested button comes into play. So by the time I went through everything, maybe a month or so, I started getting nothing but what I really wanted to see and very little of what I didn't. And anytime I saw something I didn't like or didn't want to see, I would just uninterested it. And usually it went away.
Yeah, no, for sure. I feel like it's very easy to curate your TikTok algorithm, for sure. Like super easy.
And I think Instagram is not easy.
No, I mean, to be honest, I really barely use Instagram. I don't really go on Reels that much because I've always just been on TikTok, and usually all the reels that I see on Instagram are things that I saw on TikTok first anyway. So I haven't really played with curating the Instagram reel algorithm, but I definitely my TikTok is perfectly curated to exactly the things that I'm interested in seeing. So I agree with you. And yeah, I guess we'll see. I mean, I don't really know what's going on. I don't know what's going on over there. A lot of people were like, well, now we don't, I have a lot of people who decided to delete their TikTok, which I'm all behind. I'm totally behind that, but I kind of want to keep tabs on it. I want to see what happens to it. I want to see the changes that are going to be made. So I'm still keeping on my social media because I want to see it happen in real time.
Yeah, that all of that stuff is kind of interesting to see it happen in real time. Mm-hmm. Whether you end up liking what they do or not, it's still interesting to see.
Yeah.
But anyway, the next day TikTok was back, which was the actual day it was supposed to be banned, the 19th. Around noon Eastern, I think, is when it came back. So my question is, does that make TikTok a Christ figure trope? It died and came back? Anyway.
On a Sunday?
Yeah, on a Sunday even. Wow. I didn't even think about that one.
Oh, no.
So there was another propaganda message. As soon as you logged on, you got this message. It says, welcome back. Thanks for your patience and support. As a result of President Trump's efforts, TikTok is back in the US. You can continue to create, share, and discover all the things you love on TikTok. That's just, I don't understand why they have to mention his name. It's crazy. This is
He
all a
also
setup.
he also wasn't technically president yet, first of all.
True. He wasn't. He wasn't president until
So,
Monday the 20th. So yeah.
and yeah, absolutely. And you know, it's so crazy and I kept seeing this on TikTok as well, how this is like emotional manipulation. Somebody was comparing it to the ex that blocked them for like a night and then added them back the next morning. Like this is your toxic ex. Everyone was like they couldn't wait a week. Like they really just said for 14 hours and then came back. Like this is your toxic ex. That's exactly what your toxic ex does. And I was like, that's so true.
Yeah.
Like that's so true. Like they couldn't even so everybody, at least everybody in my algorithm is like seeing right through it, which is very interesting. And they're all coming on and saying these things, which I think is really brave because we don't know what's going to happen in the next couple years. But yeah, crazy, 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 crazy. Just like emotional whiplash, manipulation, propaganda. That's how I feel. That's what I
Right.
think. So
Yeah.
that's again why I'm trying to keep tabs on it. I want to keep an eye on it so I'm not shocked when things do get even worse because I want to see it happen in
Right.
real time.
Yeah. And you, dear listener, may be wondering, well, what does this have to do with books? I get most of my book news, reviews, and recommendations watching Book Talk on TikTok. You know, it's short, quick videos. They get to the point very quickly. And I found many books that I love, and even the book that you love, The Adventures of Amina al-Sarafi. That's where I found that book. I had never heard of it until I saw a video on TikTok. Would I have found about it elsewhere? Sure. I've tried watching YouTube bookish content, but it's mostly long form, and really some of it's just not very good. Long form talking about books. I mean, multiple books maybe, but not a single book. It's really not that good. The only thing I really like bookish on YouTube is a guy named Daniel Green who does fantasy news. He covers many bookish topics and he has a personality and makes things fun and interesting. So if you're not watching him, you should be.
TikTok has formed a lot of different communities, and Book Talk is a community. So it's sad to see it go or to see it change. I think especially right now in our political climate, and like books are getting banned and things are happening like that. So TikTok was always a good way to push banned books and to talk about the things that were happening. And it is such a community that people have really found solace in. So it's sad to feel like you have to go somewhere else or create something different when you've already invested so much time into this one. And it is easy to find books because it is so quick. And again, you kind of curate your own algorithm, so then the books that are getting recommended to you are the books that you're probably going to be interested in, so you don't have to go through so much fluff around it.
Yep. And speaking of banned books, I just purchased hard copies of 1984, Animal Farm, and Fahrenheit 451 in case they do get banned.
Good. That's such a good thing to do. Stick it to the man. Buy banned books. In lighter news, Onyx Storm, the next book in the Fourth Wing series, came out today. Day we're recording, January 21st. I already have two friends that are nose deep into it and enjoying it. So that's the big thing on Book Talk right now. Everybody's trying to find a little joy in their romantic fantasy. So if that's what you're doing out there, I hope it's everything that you wanted for the past couple years.
Let's talk about Blood Over Brighthaven now. Let's go into the recap first. What do you got for us, Miranda?
Let's do it. All right. So the last 7 chapters. Siona was working on her presentation with the help of Thamel. Thamel challenges her and makes her think in ways she's never thought before. There's an explosion she believes Renthorn is behind. Dad thinks Bringham has something to do with it as well. Renthorn then recruits the others to his team, tries with Siona, but she refuses. Thamel questions this initially, but we find out later he agrees with her decision. She hits a wall with her research. She learns from Thamel more about the Quen, Maedras, and the Industray tribe, but has a hard time believing her founders and religion are bad, causing them, Siona and Thamel, to get into an argument where she acts very self-righteous. She then puts the pieces together, though, and discovers he may have been right after digging deeper into Stravos' history. She creates a mirror that can see clearly into the other realm, which Thomel recognizes as the Quinn. And when she siphons, she sees that the sourcing is the Blight. And Siona refuses to believe it at first. He storms out, and she uses siphoning on a girl and kills her. Crazy. This causes her to go into full-on crash-out mode, discovering everything she ever thought she knew was a lie. She almost commits suicide, but Alba, her cousin, stops her. Meanwhile, Thomel goes back home, and we meet Kara again at 14, and he tells her everything. And that's where we last left off.
Yes, it is. So we did have some listener feedback. Jay from Discord says she doesn't trust Brigham either, and she's hypercritical of anything he says because of her suspicions. She also liked Thomel's explanation of his religion and the relation to Tyrion's mages and how it sets up the foundation of dire consequences. And what they mean to do doesn't matter in the wake of the destruction and hateful values they uphold. She also quoted the proverb, "The road to hell is paved with good intentions," which is, yeah, that's very much what Thomel was trying to explain with his little parable as well. So Jay also said that she was getting angry at the brainwashing, Siona being so smart but blinded by her indoctrination, saying Siona barely questions the historical texts written by men who created a society that subjugates women and outsiders. And with all that evidence right in front of her, she still works hard to justify it and excuse it. And I said, yeah, definitely we can see that in our world as well when it comes to religion. I mean, there's plenty of smart people out there that have been brainwashed by religion for years.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes it really hard for me to be mad at her about it, because it is something that is force-fed to all of them from birth. That's not an easy thing to work through, especially when you've dedicated your whole life and purpose and worth to. So to me, it's going to be more about her discovering the truth and then her actions after that. Will she do the right thing and change her way of thinking, even though it's hard? Or will she keep a blind eye?
Who's to say? I guess we'll be finding out.
We find out here in the next chapters 13 through 18.
Yes. Moving on to those. First of all, up front, I just want to say I did not enjoy these 6 chapters. They were just not as exciting. They didn't have the same oomph as the first 12 chapters did to me. What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think the pacing of this book in general, I don't really love. I feel like there's not enough pushing the plot forward. And in fact, I'm not really so sure what the plot even is at this point. I feel like it's been a lot of setup and a lot of character development. And it also, to me, feels like the author is trying to discuss so many topics at once involving feminism and colonialism, which is great. It's something we should definitely be talking about. I love that, we're writing things like this. But it doesn't feel spread out enough for me. So it doesn't necessarily feel like anything's actually happening sometimes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And it does feel like Miss Wang is trying to have a treatise on way too many things at once. But I think there is a solution for her. She could just have a good old-fashioned lobotomy.
Oh my God. Let's talk about lobotomies, Dad.
Which we do
Let's
here
get
in
into
chapter 13. Right? So this entire chapter is another huge example of the misogyny in this world. And this time it's how they deal with the mental health of women. But I did notice one thing. There was no paying the doctor after the session was over. So maybe they at least have socialized healthcare. So, they got that going for them, which is nice.
Yeah, honestly, I would love a free lobotomy right now. And in our current state of the world, that sounds nice.
That's a little extreme, I think, don't you?
Just kidding, guys.
Yes,
I'm just a girl. Just a girl who wants a lobotomy. No, just kidding. So also in this chapter, we have Siona's dream. Let's play Losing My Religion by R.E.M., shall we? That's like all the dream was basically about her, coming to this realization, having, dealing with her consciousness, dealing with the fact that everything she's learned is a lie. And so she uses this doctor to kind of talk through everything that she's been thinking and feeling. And she really intellectualized her feelings there, which thankfully put her on the right track to do. It was very knowledge is power of her, and a really interesting, again, just seeing how her character plays out, how she has to logically figure out how to feel was very interesting to me.
Right. Yes. Usually the doctor has a sounding board. That was pretty funny. I enjoyed that.
Yeah. Yeah, it was silly.
All right, moving into chapter 14, The Crossing. So we learn more about those two towers. We weren't sure about them in the first episode, the reserve towers. So what they do is they siphon everything within a certain proximity of Brighthaven. And she gave how far it was. I couldn't remember. It was some kind of weird,
Like 2 miles south
right,
of
some Leonite
thing.
mileage or something. It had a specific type of mileage, whatever their unit of measurement is. So that's what makes the crossing into Brighthaven so dangerous, because it's basically just sucking the magic power out of everything within that proximity. So if you get too close to Brighthaven, you're just going to get blighted. Basically, that's used to power the entire city, everything from heating your tea to making the trains run. We learned a little bit more about Archmage Sabernine as well, or High Mage Sabernine. I can't remember which one he is. He didn't discover, like I had thought, he could actually see through the mirror clearly like Siona now does. But he did discover the true meaning of how magic works and how the blight works. And he used that to take out his rival. So my whole theory on him was wrong, and he was just actually going for power.
Yeah, all these men are on a full-on power trip with this knowledge. I also liked the moment where she talked to Ansel, the baker boy, about his brother, and she finds out some useful information that his brother killed himself after working at the border because of the things he saw and what he was expected to do, like throwing the weak ones back out into the blight. I also just feel like this was a really nice moment for her growth, because she was really actually trying to connect with another person, which I think will be important later on when she's trying to start a revolution that she doesn't really know exactly she's starting yet. But I liked that moment. I liked when she found that out, and I liked her, trying to connect with somebody else was nice character growth on her end.
Right. Yeah. I did like that part too. So moving on to chapter 15, The Truth. Siona confronts Archmage Brigham, who comes out and says, "Yep, you got it. You figured it out." Then he proceeds to gaslight the hell out of her, going with the old Quinn deserved what they're getting because they didn't convert to the Tyran religion. So my question on this one is, do you think the author picked the name Brigham for a reason? Because it's pretty close to Brigham. And I actually made a joke in the first episode about Brigham Young when we talked about Brigham. And Brigham Young was an early leader of the Mormon church. And to me, out of all the different sects of Christianity, the Mormon church has got to be the most cultish of them all. Sorry, Brandon Sanderson. But to me, it's just the most cultish church. And then this Leonite religion really feels very cultish as well. So if you're not familiar with the Mormon church, it was founded by Joseph Smith, who said he found gold plates with scripture written on them by Jesus in the United States of America, Pennsylvania, I think, to be exact. Later on, Smith was assassinated while he was running for president, and Brigham Young took over from there. Mormons were pretty much kicked out of everywhere they went and actually fought a war in Illinois against other Americans. And eventually they settled in Salt Lake City, Utah, and even there they ended up having to fight the U.S. Army at one point. So other than the names Brigham and Brigham being close, maybe there's not a connection. I don't know. It just seems so strange to me that this religion stuff and how cultish it feels, and then the name Brigham is so close to Brigham that there's kind of maybe some kind of connection there, but maybe not. I don't know. I did some digging into M.L. Wang, whether she was a member of the Church of Latter-day Saints, which is the Mormon church, and it didn't say anything. I did find out some other things about her, though, that she is half white and half Chinese. Her father's Chinese, her mother's white, and she was actually born in Wisconsin. And I didn't know that. I thought she was actually full Chinese and was born in China. So maybe it helps to look up the authors you're reading and know more about them, which is what I was trying to do with this religion thing, but there was no mention of religion. I even went and read a couple of interviews she did and couldn't find anything where she talks. She talks a little bit about religion in one of the interviews, but it's nothing major. Apparently she considers herself a recluse as well. So I don't think she gets out and talks too much.
Like a lot of authors do. I feel like most authors are pretty reclusive, and they all do live like somewhere like Wisconsin or something.
Or Washington. I think a lot of authors live in Washington too.
They always live in these like cold, dark places. But to each their. I mean, I feel like you have to if you're writing a book. It takes a lot of time and work and focus. I mean, I love to write. It's so hard to write in New York because there's just always so much going on. I'm like, I don't want to sit down and write. So
right.
So I understand why. But no, I mean, I think there's definitely some religious subtext to the name. I think it was intentional. I do think that this religion that they all follow is more of a cult than a religion, unless you think all religions are cults, but to each their own. There's definitely some big time gaslighting and this idea that women can't handle the truth because we're too emotional. And I liked this quote later in the chapter. It says, I think Siona thinks this. Siona thinks the path to God wasn't laid for women like her, it was laid on their backs. Yeah, I like this quote because it really resonated with me. You know, living in a society that wasn't made for you. The system isn't set up to work for women or people of color. And yet who's been doing all the work? So I thought that was a really good quote. Also, this idea of doing horrible things in the name of progress and God, which is basically Brigham's whole gaslighting point, right? Was that, you know, yeah, like we are doing these terrible, terrible things, but it's because God told us to. And that's why we have all of the things that we have here. So it was giving to me very, very slavery in the US, very manifest destiny. You know, it doesn't matter that we're out here. We gotta, you know, doing these terrible things, murdering people, making people work for nothing because this is what God wants us to do.
Right.
This is how we bring about good in this world. And if we have to do some terrible things to get there, well, damn it, that's just what the Bible says. So I liked the dealing of that. That was interesting.
And what's funny about what you just said, that's what the Bible said. And I don't think the Bible says anything about that. I think they just said they want to do that and used God as an excuse.
Well, right, yeah. Well, I think they did try to pull out some Bible verses back in the day that made slavery okay.
Oh, yes, because yes, there's definitely slavery in the Bible.
Right. So, you know, using these little things to try and be like, no, this is the glory of God. This is how we become better. This is how we educate the savages of the world. You know, it's for their own good, which
Right.
was very, very much what Brigham was saying, and that she's just going to have to deal with it, you know, and oh, poor her, because she's a woman. It's so much harder. And that's why she shouldn't even be dealing with this. But he believes in her. He believes that she can put her emotions aside as a woman and know that this is all for the better. It's interesting to me that also magic and sourcing depends on life. I think Brigham says that because he says that if they don't use human life, they have to use other sources of life, like the animals and
Right.
plants, which also puts the Quinn in the same boat anyway, which I think Thama was also saying. So interesting that they're sourcing on a finite resource. Because what will they do when they wipe out the people of the Quinn altogether?
And all the animals and all the other living things in the area. Well, we're going to find out what their plans are there.
Yeah, they do talk about it later on.
Yeah.
But I thought that spoke a lot on our society today and how we get our resources and how, you know, we're sucking our planet dry.
Right.
And what are we going to do? And I mean, we're in a water crisis where, you know, all these things are happening. So what are we going to do when we run out of resources?
Well, we're just going to go to Mars. We're just going to go to Mars where there's very little water there either.
Right. You know, if you've got the money to go to Mars.
Right.
I don't know if they're sending people like me and you to Mars.
Yeah, well, I don't want to go anyway, so can leave that to old Elon.
Oh yeah, he can please leave the planet.
He can go on the first rocket.
God.
All right, chapter 16, the taking. So Renthorn attacks Siona, and now we know why Thomel does not like Renthorn, because he's basically a sexual predator, because there's much talk about some of the other Quinn cleaning women that he put himself upon as well. But Thomel comes to the rescue here and knocks Renthorn out, and it causes a ruckus, and the other mages come to investigate. And in order to keep Thomel from being in more trouble, Siona makes up a lie that he accidentally set off one of her personal defense conduits, and she actually fires him right there on the spot in front of the other mages. And then later on, before she leaves the magic center, she goes and gets that broken spellograph that Thomel threw when he got all pissed off and ran off. He threw a spellograph and broke it. Anyway, she goes and grabs that out of the trash and takes it home.
Yeah, that was quick thinking on her part, firing Thomel, trying to fix the situation that was in. Sad that she couldn't just tell the actual truth because nobody would believe her because she's a woman and he's Quinn. So that was sad to read because that's, you know, that happens all the time. But yeah, Renthorn, what a sadist, what a psychopath. Because he also was like, you've felt the power, you've seen it, you
Right.
felt it. Like, what was that like? And then it like turned him on.
Right. Yeah,
I
definitely
was like,
weird.
that's nasty. I'm sure though that a lot of these men are the same way, you know? I bet they all know what the truth is and they're doing it anyway. And it's because they're on power trips.
Right. All right. Chapter 17, Girl Talk. Siona comes up with a plan, explains it to Kara and Thomal. But before that, she has Alba fix that spellograph she brought home. And she uses that to create a large spell web for her plan. And she learns that the guards beat up Thomal after she fired him.
Yeah. I liked the moment with Siona at home with Alba and Aunt Winnie, and I liked how we got a little bit more with Alba too, and how she's actually quite capable. Because I feel like in the beginning, Siona really made her out to be this kind of like wimpy little character.
Right. And I think I called her a flat character, which, I mean, technically she still kind of is, but because we don't get a lot of background on her, this did show that she, has some abilities to do things and is pretty smart herself.
Yeah, she's got skills and she's super smart. And I like that Siona kind of realized that, I think, for the first time in that moment, because Siona's just doing a lot of growth going on over there on her part. So that was a nice moment. I liked that. Also in this chapter, when Siona does go over to Thomal and Kara's house, the author brings up the idea of white guilt while Siona and Kara are talking. You can tell that Siona, she's really trying hard not to use her guilt and feelings to manipulate the situation, and Kara does keep calling her out on it. But I think she does a good job of trying to validate Kara's feelings. It speaks a lot to what me and my friends call the oppression Olympics, which is always a hot topic in my day-to-day. Like, who really has it worse? Women, people of color, queer people, immigrants. It's important to understand that we shouldn't be fighting each other, but our common enemy, which for us is rich white men, and in Tehran, it's the Tehrannish men. So I liked that because it's such a hard thing to do, because Siona really is going through it, and I do feel for her. But also at the same time, it's hard for Kara to see it, because Kara's been dealing with this her whole life and has been beaten down, and so it is hard to watch this like privileged Tehrannish woman cry about all of these things when she's like, girl, you so for real. Like, you don't know the struggle that I know. But I think that Siona does a good job of being like, you know what, you're right. I don't know the struggle that you know. But this is also affecting me. And right now, we need to come together, even though you don't really like me that much. And we need to fight the common enemy.
Which in your notes, you put men. So that's why I was doing my devil horns here. Being a man, I am the common enemy.
White man.
Right, exactly. So the oppression Olympics, so that sounds to me like something similar to intersectionality, which is the belief that our social justice movements must consider all of the intersections of identity, privilege, and oppression that people face in order to be just and effective. And I learned about this when I read a book called So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijeoma Oluo. And I can't recommend that book enough. It was a really good book. It's really eye-opening for a white man to read about that and to actually learn something. And I think everyone can learn from that book. So please go read something like that. If not that book, something else that's similar.
Educate yourselves on your privilege, people.
Yes.
We all have some sort of privilege.
You're right.
Like that. We all do. But it's important to know what privileges you do have.
Right.
And how to use them for the betterment of the common fight against the common enemy, as opposed to doing what the common enemy wants us to do, which is fight each other. And I think she did a good job of talking about that in this chapter.
All right. Chapter 18, Feast and Family. So Kara and Siona break into the Magic Center to sabotage one of the reserve towers. And during this covert op, Siona sneaks into the Archmage Supreme Orinel's office. She steals a couple of action spells that are going to be part of the Berry Extension spell that she's supposed to be working on. That's her big project she's supposed to be working on. And she's almost caught doing this because Orinel and a couple of other high mages come in there, and she learns that they are actually researching how to expand the siphoning zone, which means blighting more people beyond their current range. And that's what we were talking about earlier, where, when they do run out of things to siphon from in this current area, what are they going to do? Because it's a finite amount, right? So that's what their plan is. They are going to try to expand the zone even further in the world.
Well, it's interesting because it's not really necessarily their plan. It's like like a theory that's out there that there is more to the other realm. But some of them were saying, we don't even know if this is true. We don't know, like, that. Why should we be questioning God's will? Like, this is the other realm according to what was given us by God. So we shouldn't even be thinking about like going outside of that.
That didn't make sense to me because it's still a finite amount of material that can be siphoned. So they're going to have to figure out something.
Well, again, these people, they're just so brainwashed by their religion.
Yeah.
That they don't want to, they don't want to believe that their God is wrong because it's all they know. So then when they hear these, and I think that's probably what's going on in their politics in general. They're probably fighting about that,
Right.
like, what are we going to do when we end these finite resources? Well, what if we try extending the coordinates? And people are like, that's against God and Leon and the blah, that's probably
Right.
it's probably a big fight going on that they're not publicizing. It'd be interesting if we do touch on that later on. Yeah, and then also in this scene, I mean, Siona kind of learns for herself what it's like to be Quen and not to be noticed. Because the whole time she's thinking like, somebody's going to see me, somebody saw me, somebody's after me, somebody's got to be like paying attention to me. And it's like, nobody was, because she was dressed as Quen. And that she really realized firsthand, like, oh, wow, people really don't see the Quen as people, which she didn't, remember?
Yeah.
And when you were really mad at her in the beginning, because
exactly. Yeah.
She was looking for a real person.
Looking around for a real
janitor.
person because the janitor was Quen. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we kind of came back to that, and she was like, wait a minute. We really don't see Quen as people, do we?
Nope.
So that was a fun little thing for her to learn firsthand.
So we also get a little bit more backstory about Thomel and what he's been up to the last 10 years. So he's dated a couple of women and says he doesn't want children, which I don't blame him at all. I wouldn't want to bring children into that world either, especially as a Quen.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I probably wouldn't either. And it's sad. And then hearing about, how a lot of them can't even have children because of their working conditions was pretty sad.
Right. And I think he specifically mentioned the women that work for Brigham in the textile factories and the dyes.
Yeah, the dyes, because he said that she did end up, one of his exes did end up getting pregnant, but it was a stillbirth.
Right.
Because of the dyes, we're pretty sure. Yeah, and that's a hot button topic, in my generation for sure. Like, is it even worth having children right now these days? How could we think about bringing children to this world? But then also just with everything going on with like our reproductive rights, it's like, is it safe for us to even bring a child into this world in certain states? Definitely a hot button topic that the author definitely chose to talk about here. I also really loved the conversation between Thomel and Siona about him not teaching Kara to assimilate because he missed his culture so much and he wanted her to represent that culture that he missed, even though he had to assimilate himself. I know that there are a lot of immigrants and generations before that really feel this in the United States. I know that my mom is of Mexican descent. She was born and raised in Texas. Her parents were too. I think maybe her great-grandparents, somebody along the line came from Mexico. She told me recently that her mom, because her mom would have went to school in the like 50s, 60s, and she told me that they used to get punished. They used to get smacked on the hand if they spoke Spanish in school. And because of that, my grandma really learned how to assimilate, because if you didn't assimilate in America, you died. Basically, you got in trouble, you got punished. And so her parents didn't teach her Spanish. And subsequently, I don't really know Spanish that well. Even the 5 years I took in school, didn't really retain any of it. And it's really sad that, we've had to lose a lot of our culture and our background because we felt like we had to assimilate into our society. So I liked him talking about that a lot. I like that he didn't do it to Kara, even though he feels a lot of guilt for not doing it because he thinks it's making her life harder, which again was a big reason why immigrants don't teach their children these things, because they don't want their lives to be harder in this country. That was really interesting. I liked that moment. Yeah, and in that conversation, also, Thomel realizes that he shouldn't be playing Oppression Olympics either. That Siona herself was also facing a choice every day between death and authenticity, because how could Siona not be this powerful, intellectual woman that she is? Like, he knows that it is everything to her, working and being a high mage, and that the only other option for her was death, that she could not live a mediocre life.
Right.
So
she couldn't
that was
just be a housewife or cleaning or work in some factory.
Right. Yeah.
Yep.
So that was a good realization for him.
Well, that wraps up our discussion of chapters 13 through 18 of Blood Over Brighthaven by Emma Wang. Share your thoughts with us and join the conversation on Discord, Blue Sky, Instagram, and TikTok. It's still there for now, I promise. Links are in the show notes. We'd love to hear what resonated with you and the questions you're pondering. What are you most excited to see unfold next time? So I have a little more listener feedback to discuss. So we were talking about our TBRs last episode, and Jay on Discord says her TBR is pretty similar to ours. She just started rewatching the Expanse TV show and plans on reading it soon. And she wants to read the Stormlight Archive 1 through 3 again. Reread the Stormlight Archive 1 through 3 before moving on to 4 and 5. And she said, Tortured Hero is right, which I think that's what you said last week about it, that's what you heard.
Yeah, that's how somebody was trying to sell it on me. I got somebody really into Red Rising as well. And so we kind of spent all year like talking about Red Rising. And I think he also suggested that I watch The Expanse and like read those books.
Yeah.
And then, was telling me that the 5th Stormlight Archive book came out and asked me if I'd read them or heard of them. And I was like, no, actually. And he was like, well, you'd like them because it's tortured hero.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, well, sure. So if you also love a tortured hero and you're reading Stormlight, you also really love Red Rising.
Right.
If you haven't read that either. So
yeah, and the Expanse TV show, I do want to watch that, but I kind of want to read the books first before I watch the TV show.
Sure. I'm a big fan of reading the books first myself.
Well, thanks for your feedback, Jay. We really appreciate it. At this point, you may have to come on as a guest sometime. You're the only one that's given us feedback so far, but we do appreciate it.
We really do. We really do appreciate it.
And that's a wrap for episode 3 of Dad and Daughter Reads, a book club podcast. Thank you so much for joining us as we explore chapters 13 through 18 of Blood Over Brighthaven by Emma Wang. The stakes are higher than ever, and we can't wait to see how it all comes together in the end.
Next week, we'll dive into the final chapters, 19 through 23, and wrap up our discussion on this book. You don't want to miss it.
In the meantime, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this week's episode. What stood out to you? What are the final predictions for how this story ends? Join the conversation on Discord, TikTok, Instagram, and Blue Sky. You can also find our book club schedule there. Links are in the show notes.
And don't forget to use the hashtag #DadAndDaughterReads so we can find your comments and maybe feature them in the next episode.
Thanks again for listening, and if you enjoyed the podcast, please consider leaving us a review and sharing it with your fellow book lovers. It really helps us grow our little book club.
Until next time, happy reading!
Take care, everyone, and we'll see you next week for the big finale of Blood Over Brighthaven. Our intro music is Upbeat Funk, performed by Mikhail Shmusev, and our outro music is Lo-Fi Chill Medium version, performed by Bodan Kuzmin. You can find both tracks on pixabay.com. Thanks for joining us, family, and we'll see you next week.